I never imagined that one meeting, just 10 minutes long, could flip my entire life upside down. But that's exactly what happened the morning my boss called me into her glass office with a smile that didn't match her eyes. I remember walking in with my notebook in hand, thinking it was just another routine update. Instead, she slid a folder across the table and told me something that made my chest tighten and my fingers go cold. She said the company was restructuring, and that meant my salary was being cut by 60%. Not 60. As if she were offering me a generous discount instead of slicing away more than half of my income. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her, trying to understand how someone could say something so life-changing in such a casual, almost cheerful tone. She kept talking, using words like temporary, strategic, and team spirit, but none of it softened the blow. All I could think about was rent, bills, groceries, and every hour I had invested into this job. Every late night, every weekend sacrificed, every time I showed up early and stayed late, believing that hard work would eventually be recognized. Instead, this was my reward. She looked at me like she expected me to thank her, like agreeing to a 60% salary cut was some kind of loyalty test. For a second, I wondered if I heard her wrong. Maybe she meant 6%. Maybe this was a joke. But no, her expression stayed flat, confident, almost rehearsed. And in that moment, a strange calm fell over me. I realized that I wasn't shocked because of what she said. I was shocked because deep down, I knew they had been preparing for this. The signs were always there, but I kept ignoring them. The sudden micromanaging, the budget adjustments, the way they slowly removed my responsibilities and handed them to someone else. The meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. I thought things would get better. I thought they still valued me. I thought wrong. My boss leaned forward and told me she hoped I would take the cut gracefully because it would show commitment to the company. She even said it would be a great opportunity to prove myself. That one line burned more than anything else. Prove myself? As if the years I had already given meant nothing. As if loyalty was a one-way street that only flowed toward them. But I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let her see the anger vibrating beneath my skin. I simply nodded, pretending I needed time to process the news. She smiled, relieved, thinking I had accepted it, thinking I was weak, thinking I had no choice. But the truth? I already knew what I was going to do next. Outside her office, everything felt blurry. People moved around me, talking, laughing, typing, completely unaware that my world had just been shaken. My desk felt different when I sat down, as if it no longer belonged to me. My computer screen looked unfamiliar. Even the sound of the office printer annoyed me. And while my boss must have thought I was quietly accepting her decision, I was actually replaying every moment that brought me here. Every sacrifice they had happily taken advantage of. Every promise they never kept. Every time they praised me publicly but dismissed me privately. And with every thought, something inside me hardened. I realized that they weren't cutting my salary because the company was struggling. They were cutting it because they thought I wouldn't push back. They assumed I needed this job too much to fight. They assumed I was desperate enough to accept anything they threw at me. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing myself for a turning point for months. I had doubts, yes, but I also had plans. Quiet plans. Plans they never bothered to ask about because they never cared enough to see me as more than a replaceable employee. As the day went on, my coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but no one asked what was wrong. Maybe they were scared to get involved, or maybe they already knew what was happening behind the scenes. Secrets don't stay hidden in offices like ours. Rumors travel faster than emails. I kept working as if nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. Each email I sent, each task I completed, every polite smile I forced, it all felt like the final pages of a chapter one was ready to close. During lunch, I went to my car, turned off my phone, and sat in silence. That silence helped me think clearly, maybe for the first time in months. I knew one thing very clearly. If I accepted this insulting salary cut, I would be giving them permission to walk all over me for the rest of my time there. And I wasn't going to do that. Not after everything I had already given. Not after they made it so clear that loyalty meant nothing to them. So I made a decision that would change everything, not just for me, but for my boss, too. When I returned to the office, I opened a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then I started typing. The words flowed easily. They were calm, clear, professional, and powerful. Every sentence mattered. Every line carried weight. I didn't write in anger. I wrote with purpose, with confidence, with clarity. And when I finished, I printed it out and placed it in a plain white envelope. The envelope that would rewrite the ending of the story. Then I sat back in my chair, looking at that envelope resting on my desk. That simple piece of paper held everything my boss didn't expect. Everything she didn't see coming. Everything she assumed I was too afraid to do. And the moment she opened it, well, that moment would be the start of something she would never forget. But before I handed it to her, something happened. Something that changed my entire plan in a way I didn't see coming. Something that made the story take a turn no one in that office could have predicted, not even me. And that's where everything really begins. When I saw my boss walking down the hallway toward her office, I tightened my grip on the envelope. I could hear her heels tapping against the floor, sharp and confident, like she owned every inch of the building. Maybe she did. Maybe that was part of the problem. But I wasn't ready to hand her the letter yet, not until I understood what changed so suddenly that they felt comfortable cutting my salary by 60%. There had to be something more behind it, something no one was saying out loud. So instead of standing up and following her, I slipped the envelope back into my drawer. The moment I did, I felt a wave of curiosity wash over me, replacing some of the anger that had been boiling since morning. I needed answers, real answers, not the nicely wrapped excuses she gave me earlier. If I was going to walk away or stay and fight, I wanted to know exactly what was going on behind those closed meetings and whispered conversations. Something told me the salary cut wasn't just about restructuring. It was about hiding something, protecting someone, covering up something bigger happening inside the company. During the afternoon, I paid closer attention to the office than I ever had before. I noticed the way two managers kept exchanging glances whenever someone mentioned budget updates. I noticed how the newly hired assistant, who had been there barely a month, had access to files that took me years to earn permission to see. I noticed how my boss kept looking over her shoulder, almost as if she expected someone to walk in on her. None of this looked like normal corporate changes. It looked like fear. It looked like pressure. It looked like secrets. And suddenly the salary cut felt less personal, but more dangerous. I thought about the past year, about how everything slowly shifted without anyone admitting it. The company used to feel like a team, but lately it felt like a place where everyone worked in silence, avoiding the truth. Even the executive meetings seemed tense, as if someone above them was making decisions without explanation. We were all expected to simply accept it, but cutting my salary by 60%, that felt like a warning. A way to push me out without saying it directly. Or maybe a way to keep me quiet. By the time the clock hit 3, I found myself replaying every strange moment from the last few months. Like when the finance department suddenly stopped showing numbers on the screens during presentations, claiming the projector wasn't working. Or when the company canceled employee benefits without announcing it, letting us find out slowly, one by one. Or the biggest red flag, the day my boss asked me to sign a document without reading it, telling me it was just routine, but refusing to explain why she needed my signature so urgently. I didn't sign it then, and now I was glad I didn't. Something about all these pieces felt connected, even if I didn't know how. While everyone else gathered around the break area for afternoon coffee, whispering the usual gossip, I stayed at my desk. My phone buzzed with messages from friends asking about my day, but I ignored them. My mind was too busy trying to make sense of everything. I opened a blank page on my computer, not to write anything official, but just to list every suspicious detail I remembered. The list grew faster than I expected. Names, dates, conversations, missing documents, changes in behavior. It was all there. I stared at the list, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. Something was undeniably wrong inside the company, something they didn't want anyone to figure out. But why target me? Why cut my salary in such an extreme and insulting way? Then it hit me. Because I was the one who asked the most questions. I was the one who reviewed files with too much attention. I was the one who never signed anything without fully understanding it. I was the one who didn't let things slide just because someone above me said it was fine. Maybe they saw me as a threat, and pushing me out quietly was easier than confronting the truth. My heartbeat picked up as I realized I might be holding information they didn't want me to put together. Maybe the salary cut wasn't a punishment, it was a distraction. Maybe they thought lowering my pay would break my confidence, make me desperate, or force me to quit before I connected the dots. But instead, it woke something up inside me. Something stronger than fear. Something that made me want to see the full picture before making any choices. Just when I started diving deeper into the files stored on my desktop, the office door behind me opened, and I quickly minimized the screen. I glanced back, pretending to look busy, and saw my boss standing there. She didn't come to my desk. She only scanned the room, as if checking to see who was working and who wasn't. Her eyes paused on me for a moment longer than usual. Not long enough to be suspicious, but long enough to feel like she was watching me more closely than before. When she walked away, I felt a small rush of adrenaline. It confirmed what I suspected. She didn't trust me anymore. And that feeling went both ways. Later, when most people were packing up to leave, I stayed seated, pretending to finish a report. In reality, I was waiting for the moment the office grew quiet, the moment when fewer eyes were around. I didn't want anyone to see what I was going to do next. I waited until the lights outside our department dimmed, and the hallway became still. Only the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. My boss's office door was closed, but the thin strip of light under it told me she was still inside. Before I could overthink it, I got up from my chair and quietly walked toward the storage room where old company files were kept. Almost no one went in there anymore since everything had become digital, but something told me that if there were answers the company tried to hide, they wouldn't all be online. Paper trails were harder to delete. When I pushed the door open, the room smelled like dust and fading ink. Boxes lined the shelves, some labeled neatly, others carelessly stacked. I reached for a box marked Quarterly Reports, Previous Cycle. That phrase alone made me suspicious. It shouldn't have existed in this room. Reports like these were supposed to be stored securely in the main server, not shoved into an old box like forgotten leftovers. I opened it slowly, half expecting nothing and half expecting too much. Inside, there were papers stuffed together with no order, memos, spreadsheets, handwritten notes, meeting printouts. None of this looked normal. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized someone had moved these documents in a hurry, almost as if they were trying to keep them away from certain eyes. My hands shook a little as I flipped through the papers. Numbers that didn't match. Budgets that disappeared. Approvals without signatures. It felt like uncovering a puzzle that someone tried to bury. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I knew that if my boss found me in here, this would turn into a completely different kind of conversation. And I didn't know if I was ready for that yet. I was so focused on the papers that I didn't hear footsteps approaching, until I heard someone's voice behind me. A voice I would have never expected to hear at that moment. A voice that made me freeze, the file still in my hands. And when I turned around, everything I thought I knew about that company and my place in it changed again. When I turned around, I expected to see my boss. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even panic on her face. Instead, it was someone I hadn't even considered, Mark, the quiet analyst from the finance team. He always kept to himself, always stayed late, always looked buried under spreadsheets. I barely heard him speak more than a few words on a normal day. But now he stood in the doorway staring at me like he already knew exactly what I was doing. For a second, neither of us said anything. I held the papers in my hands, unsure if I should hide them or put them back. He took one step inside the room, then another, and closed the door behind him. The click of the lock made my heart beat faster. Not because I felt threatened, he didn't look dangerous, but because someone had finally stepped into the shadows I'd been trying to make sense of. Someone who might know more than I did. He kept his voice low when he finally spoke. "You shouldn't be looking at those." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "Why? What's going on?" Mark looked tired, more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. Like someone carrying a weight he didn't ask for. He ran his hand through his hair and shook his head slowly. "You're not the only one they targeted, you know. They've been doing it to a few of us. One person at a time. Salary cuts. Sudden demotions. Quiet meetings. It's all connected." My stomach knotted. Connected how? What are they hiding? He hesitated, and that hesitation scared me more than any answer could. It told me he was deciding whether to trust me, whether to drag someone else into whatever mess he had already discovered. The silence between us felt heavy, like the whole building was holding its breath. "You've seen things," he said. "You've noticed things. That's why they came for you. You ask questions. People like us, we don't fit into their new plan." That word, plan, sent a chill through me. It confirmed everything I had been feeling but couldn't put into words. This wasn't random. This wasn't some typical corporate restructuring. This was a strategy, a strategic plan to remove certain employees, maybe the ones who were too observant, too honest, too hard to manipulate. I lowered my voice. "Are you saying they're hiding financial information?" He exhaled sharply, like he'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. "Not just hiding, changing, adjusting, moving things where they don't belong. I've seen numbers shift overnight, numbers that shouldn't change unless someone edits them manually. When I asked questions, they reassign my tasks. Then they cut my hours. Next week, they'll probably cut my salary too, just like yours." I looked down at the papers again, and everything suddenly felt heavier, like each sheet carried a piece of truth they wanted buried. "Why didn't you say anything before now?" Mark laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You can't just walk into the office and accuse your boss of manipulating reports. That's the fastest way to get thrown out. But now that I've seen you digging, I figured you deserve to know you're not alone." Hearing those words gave me a strange sense of relief, but also fear. If more employees were being quietly pushed down, it meant the problem was bigger than I thought. And the deeper I went, the more dangerous it might get. But the suspense kept pulling me in. Not knowing the full truth felt worse than the risk. Before I could ask more, we heard footsteps outside the door. Heavy, slow, the kind that made your pulse jump. Mark's eyes widened, and he motioned for me to put the papers back. My hands moved quickly, stuffing documents into the box, trying to make everything look untouched. The door handle rattled once, but didn't open. Then the footsteps moved away. We both let out a breath of relief. But the tension didn't disappear, it got stronger. Mark stepped closer and whispered, "We need to talk somewhere else. Not here. Not tonight. But soon." He paused, his expression tightening. "And don't trust anyone. Especially not her." I didn't have to ask who her meant. We were both thinking of the same person, my boss. He slipped out of the room first, leaving me alone with the dusty air and unanswered questions. I waited a few seconds before walking out, my heartbeat still uneven. When I stepped back into the hallway, the office lights seemed dimmer, the shadows deeper. It felt like the building itself was hiding something. Back at my desk, I tried to look normal, typing slowly, pretending to finish a project. But inside, my mind was racing through every possibility. If the financial reports were being manipulated, what were they hiding? Debt? Missing funds? A failing department they didn't want investors to know about? And why target people like me and Mark? Because we asked questions? Because we paid attention? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The salary cut wasn't just an insult, it was leverage. A way to push me into silence. A way to make me feel powerless. But now that I had seen enough to confirm that something real was happening, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't sit quietly while someone tried to erase the truth. Still, I knew I had to be careful. Going to HR wouldn't help, they were too closely tied to management. Confronting my boss would only alert her that I knew too much. And quitting immediately would leave Mark alone, and leave me without closure. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. As the day neared its end, I noticed something even stranger. A new face in the office, someone I had never seen before. A woman wearing a badge that didn't match anyone from our company. She walked straight into my boss's office without knocking, and the door closed behind her. Something about her posture, her confidence, even the way she scanned the room reminded me of an auditor. Or someone from a regulatory team. Someone sent when things are not going well. But I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that my boss's expression changed when she saw the woman walk in. She looked startled, almost nervous, and that reaction alone made my suspicion feel even more real. I kept my head down, pretending I hadn't noticed. But every few seconds, my eyes drifted toward her office. I waited for the door to open again, but it stayed closed for almost an hour. When it finally opened, the woman walked out with a file in her hand and a stern expression on her face. My boss followed her to the elevator, talking quickly, almost breathlessly, trying to explain something. But even from a distance, I could see the woman wasn't impressed. Whatever she found, it wasn't good. And somehow, I knew I was connected to it now, without wanting to be, without asking for it. As the office emptied, I stayed behind, pretending to shut down my computer slowly. I heard my boss return to her office and close the door with more force than usual. Papers rustled. Drawers slammed. She was stressed, maybe even scared. And I still had the envelope, the letter that was supposed to change everything. But now, handing it to her didn't feel like the next step. The situation was bigger than a salary cut. Bigger than me. Bigger than that letter. I stayed in my seat, staring at the drawer where the envelope rested. And then, in the stillness of the empty office, I heard the one thing that made my heart drop completely. My boss was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, shaky, panicked. And I realized something I wasn't ready to face. Whatever she was hiding, whatever this company was involved in, it was far worse than I imagined. And I was now deeper in the middle of it than I ever meant to be. I continued sitting there, frozen, listening to those quiet, shaky sounds coming from behind my boss's closed door. It didn't make sense. This was the same woman who walked around the office as if she couldn't be touched, as if every decision she made was flawless. Hearing her break down shattered that image completely. It made everything feel more real and more dangerous. Whatever she was dealing with wasn't just a corporate mistake. It was something big enough to shake even her confidence. I pulled my chair back slowly and stood up, almost without thinking. I wasn't planning to confront her. I wasn't even planning to talk to her. But I needed to know more. I walked quietly toward her office, stopping just a few steps away from the door. Through the small gap at the bottom, I could see the faint shadow of her pacing back and forth. Papers rustled. Something metallic clinked. She was opening drawers, maybe searching for something. Then I heard her whisper to herself, a sentence so soft I barely caught it. "They can't find out. Not now. Not after everything I covered." My chest tightened. Those words confirmed every suspicion I had been trying not to believe. She wasn't just stressed. She wasn't just overwhelmed. She was hiding something. Something serious. Something she was terrified would come to light. I stepped back quickly before she could open the door and see me. I hurried back to my desk and sat down, pretending to be typing. My heartbeat felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. I didn't know how much she had covered up, or how deep it went, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever she feared being discovered was connected to the missing numbers, the manipulated files, the salary cuts, and the sudden arrival of that outside woman who looked like an investigator. The office lights flickered overhead just for a second, and the whole space felt colder than before. A few minutes later, my boss came out of her office. Her eyes were red, but she held herself together enough to walk with the same straight posture she always had. Still, I could see it, the small tremble in her hands, the way she avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Something had cracked inside her. She walked toward the elevator, but halfway there she stopped suddenly and turned her head right toward me. Our eyes met, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because she looked angry, but because she looked afraid. Afraid of what I knew. Afraid of what I might find next. Afraid of the wrong person knowing the truth. Then, without saying a word, she got into the elevator and disappeared behind the closing doors. I sat there trying to understand what that look meant. Was she warning me? Was she expecting me to stay quiet? Or was she silently begging for help? I didn't know anymore. Everything felt tangled. Her guilt, her fear, the company's secrets, Mark's involvement, my letter waiting inside my drawer. I packed my bag, ready to leave for the night, but something stopped me. A message popped up on my phone. Unknown number, no name. "We need to talk. Now." Back entrance. M. Mark. The moment I saw his initials, tension shot through my whole body. He wouldn't contact me like that unless something urgent had happened. I grabbed my bag, locked my computer, and headed toward the back exit. The hallways were dim now, the silence echoing with every step I took. I felt like every shadow was watching me, like the walls themselves were listening. When I reached the back entrance, I found Mark standing under a flickering light. He looked even more stressed than earlier. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes restless, and he kept looking around as if someone might be following him. "What happened?" I asked, stepping closer. He swallowed hard. "They know." "Who knows?" "The executives. The ones above her." He pointed vaguely upward, meaning higher management. "They know someone has been going through the old records. And they think it might be you." My breath hitched. "How?" He ran a hand over his face. "The investigator, the woman who came earlier, she wasn't sent by them. She was sent by an outside party, someone who wants the truth. But when she showed up, the execs panicked. They weren't expecting her. They weren't prepared." I let out a slow breath. "What does that mean for us?" Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It means they're scrambling. And when people scramble, they make mistakes. They start looking for someone to blame." A cold wave ran through me. "So now I'm their target." "You, me, maybe even your boss," he whispered. "Everyone who saw too much or asked the wrong questions. They're trying to protect themselves." I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. Protect themselves from what? What's so serious that they would go this far? Mark hesitated again. That same hesitation from earlier, but heavier this time. "I found something. Something I wasn't supposed to see." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. The edges were crumpled, like it had been handled in panic. When I unfolded it, my eyes scanned the numbers, and I felt everything inside me twist. It wasn't just altered totals or misreported expenses. It was a complete mismatch of funds. Money going missing. Money being recorded in places it didn't belong. Money being moved quietly, without explanation. Not small amounts. Large. Very large. "Is this?" I whispered. Mark nodded. "It's exactly what you think." My hands trembled as I held the paper. This wasn't a mistake or a miscalculation. This was deliberate, knowing, intentional, and dangerous. I looked up at him. "But why cut my salary? Why involve me in this mess?" "That's the worst part," he said. "Your name appears in some of the approval chains, not because you signed anything, but because someone used your login. Someone used your credentials to push things through." My heart nearly stopped. "What? But I never." "I know," he said quickly. "I know you didn't. But whoever did this needed someone to blame if things went wrong. They used you. They set you up." I stumbled back a step. Everything felt blurry. So the salary cut, the sudden meetings, the pressure, it was all part of a plan to break me down so I wouldn't fight back? So you would look unstable, desperate, or unreliable if anyone questioned you, he said. It makes you easier to discredit. I closed my eyes for a second, struggling to breathe. Someone had used my name. Someone had planned to put the blame on me. Someone wanted me gone before I discovered the truth. Then another thought hit me. "My boss," I said quietly. "Is she involved, or is she a victim too?" Mark's jaw tightened. "That part, I don't know. But her reaction today, it didn't look like someone guilty. It looked like someone trapped." I felt a deep, unsettling heaviness settle inside me. If she was trapped, then the real danger came from higher up. People with more power. People who could ruin careers and lives with a single decision. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Mark took a slow breath. "We find proof. Real proof. Not guesses. Not papers shoved in boxes. Something solid. Something they can't deny or destroy. Because once we have that, everything changes." I stared at him, realizing that this was bigger than both of us. And bigger than the letter waiting in my drawer. This wasn't just a workplace issue anymore. This was the moment before everything erupted. The moment right before the truth breaks open. The moment where the next step decides everything, and there's no going back after that. The moment hung in the air, still charged from the last revelation, yet something deeper seemed to stir beneath the surface. For a second, everything felt quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. They thought the worst part was behind them, that the tension they had already endured was the ultimate test. But just as they tried to regain their balance, life threw another twist straight into their path, one that neither of them saw coming. It started subtly. A phone vibration. A glance. A sudden shift in expression. At first, they tried to brush it off, assuming it was just another distraction, another minor problem waiting to be handled. But the look on their face said otherwise. Their hands tightened, the air around them changing, filling with that familiar sense of unease. It was the kind of moment where you know, without knowing why, that something bigger is coming. The message wasn't long, but the impact hit instantly. It wasn't just about the deal anymore, or the partnership, or the stress they had already managed to navigate. This new information opened a door they didn't even know existed, one that exposed layers of a situation they hadn't considered. It was as if someone had been silently working behind the scenes, watching, waiting, and now choosing the perfect moment to strike. The kind of twist that shifts the ground right under your feet. They tried to stay calm, masking their rising worry with a steady breath, but inside, everything turned. The keywords echoing in their mind, trust, strategy, timing, suddenly felt heavier, like each one carried a weight they had underestimated. And the more they tried to process what they just learned, the more they realized how tangled everything had become. This wasn't only a business challenge anymore, it had become personal. But the tension didn't stop there. Just as they were trying to make sense of a situation, another unexpected piece fell into place. Someone they had counted on, someone they believed was on their side, seemed to be involved in a way that didn't feel right. Certain details didn't match up anymore. Certain promises suddenly sounded hollow. And the uneasy feeling in their chest pulsed stronger, telling them that they were being pushed into the heart of a conflict far more complicated than before. They exchanged a tense look, both recognizing that something bigger was unfolding. They couldn't speak it aloud yet, not until they understood what they were up against. But the fear of the unknown, the risk of betrayal, and the urgency of the moment began tightening the space around them. It felt as though every second mattered now, every choice could tip the balance. The suspense kept building, rising like a quiet storm, pushing them closer to the edge. The room itself seemed different, the silence between them thick and tense. Their mind raced, trying to piece together clues they didn't even know they had gathered. Every conversation replayed itself. Every moment that felt strange now came back with a new meaning. And in that instant, they realized that what they thought was the main conflict was only the beginning of something much bigger. The second plot twist wasn't just surprising, it was destabilizing. It forced them to question their trust, question the situation, and question the entire foundation of the journey they had been fighting through. And while they tried to stay focused, the stakes grew higher with every passing heartbeat. They weren't just trying to save the deal anymore, they were trying to stop everything from collapsing around them. A sudden knock at the door made both of them tense up. The timing was too sharp, too well placed, as if perfectly aligned with the chaos swirling inside. Their pulse quickened. The suspense reached a tight peak. They stepped toward the door slowly, cautiously, knowing that whatever waited on the other side would push them even deeper into the conflict. And just before the door opened, they felt it, the shift. The sense that the true climax was coming fast, closing in, and there was no going back now. Everything was about to change again. The door opened slowly, and for a brief moment neither of them breathed. They expected the worst, prepared themselves for another shock, but instead they saw the one person they least expected, someone who should not have been there at all. The sight alone sent a wave of confusion through them. But as soon as that person stepped inside, everything that had been uncertain suddenly began to align. Pieces that had felt scattered started forming a clear picture, and the truth they had been circling around finally revealed itself. They spoke calmly at first, almost too calmly, explaining that they had known more about the situation than they had admitted earlier. It wasn't betrayal, though it had felt that way. It was something more complicated. They had been keeping quiet not to deceive anyone, but because they were trying to protect both sides from a bigger problem. Someone else had been manipulating things in the background, someone whose motives had nothing to do with the team or the project, but everything to do with control and timing. The tension rose again as they laid out the details. The earlier message, the strange changes, the sudden pressure, it was all connected. What they thought was a simple challenge was actually the result of someone quietly pulling strings, trying to push them into a mistake. Hearing this made their heart race, but for the first time it wasn't from fear, it was from clarity. They finally understood what they were fighting against. The room filled with a sharp, focused energy as they confronted the truth head-on. Their voices steadied, their confidence returned. There was no running from the conflict anymore. They confronted the person behind the manipulation, calling them out with undeniable evidence and a calm determination that left no room for excuses. It was the moment everything had been building toward, and nothing could shake it now. The final confrontation felt intense, but also strangely empowering. The real antagonist tried to deny everything, tried to twist the situation even further, but the facts were too clear. Every hidden move was exposed. Every lie came undone. And the moment the truth came out, the entire weight of the conflict lifted. The main problem, this unseen pressure, this silent sabotage, finally ended. The deal they fought so hard for stood strong. Their trust, once shaken, felt restored. And the long, stressful journey finally hit its turning point. But just when they thought everything had settled, the unexpected twist arrived. The person who had appeared at the door earlier, the one who seemed to be helping, admitted that they, too, had their own reason for stepping in. They weren't entirely innocent. They had protected them, yes, but they had also protected themselves. The sabotage hadn't affected only the project, it had threatened something of theirs as well. Their loyalty wasn't as pure as it seemed, it was strategic. The revelation wasn't harmful, but it surprised them. It reminded them that even in moments of unity, people still carry their own motivations and fears. For a second, the room felt still again, not in a dangerous way this time, but in a thoughtful one. They realized that the world wasn't divided into simple sides. Sometimes allies make choices for themselves. Sometimes unexpected help comes with hidden layers. But the conflict was resolved. The project was safe. The tension that had nearly crushed them finally broke open into a sense of relief. And though that last twist added a new shade to the story, it didn't undo the victory they had earned. It simply deepened the moment, reminding them that every journey, even a successful one, has its complexities. They exhaled, feeling the weight leave their shoulders. The climax had arrived, shaken everything, and finally settled the chaos that had been building for so long. And now, with the truth revealed and the main conflict resolved, they were ready to face whatever came next, stronger, wiser, and aware that even the closest moments can carry unexpected turns. When the tension finally broke, the room fell into a quiet that felt almost unreal. After everything that had happened, the pressure, the manipulation, the surprise twist, standing there in the stillness, made them realize how long they had been holding their breath. It wasn't just the project or the conflict that weighed on them. It was the months of doubt, fear about their future, the humiliating salary cut, and the feeling of being underestimated. All of it had been sitting on their shoulders, and now it was finally slipping away. They looked around the room, noticing how different it felt now that the truth was out. The air no longer carried that invisible heaviness. The faces that once seemed unsure now looked relieved. Even the person who had stepped in with their own complicated motives seemed calmer. No one was pretending anymore. Every question had been asked, every hidden piece exposed. The whole situation had been peeled open layer by layer, and although it had been exhausting, it brought a sense of peace that couldn't have come any other way. As they gathered their things, their boss approached, not with her usual cold expression, but with a quieter, almost humbled look. For the first time, she seemed like a real person and not just an authority figure determined to keep control. She didn't apologize directly, but her tone softened as she acknowledged everything that had unfolded. She admitted that she had trusted the wrong people, made harsh decisions too quickly, and underestimated those who were actually carrying the company forward. Hearing this wasn't meant to change the past, but it brought closure. Their eyes met, and for a moment nothing needed to be said. The boss understood that the insulting 60% salary cut had pushed things too far. It had crushed morale and nearly led to a disaster that could have cost the company more than money. And they understood that sometimes leaders make choices driven by fear, not malice, especially when they're pressured from above. It didn't erase the hurt, but it made the ending feel more grounded, more human. Before leaving the room, they handed back a simple message. Not a dramatic letter like the one they had originally planned, not something written out of anger or frustration, but a short, calm note. It explained everything clearly, what they had experienced, what they had learned, and what they hoped the workplace could become if everyone communicated honestly. It wasn't meant to punish anyone. It was meant to remind them all how easily silence and assumptions can turn small issues into big battles. Their boss read it carefully. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just nodded slowly, like someone finally seeing the whole picture. It wasn't the moment of revenge that people might expect from a story with a salary cut and betrayal. It was something much more meaningful, a moment of understanding. And in the long run, that mattered far more. Walking out of the building that day, they felt lighter. The evening air felt different. It felt like a new beginning rather than an ending. Their phone buzzed with messages from coworkers thanking them for standing up, for staying calm when things became chaotic, and for helping uncover the real issue. Some admitted that they had been afraid to speak. Others said they didn't even realize how serious things had become until the truth came out. It reminded them that many people stay silent not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to move against pressure. The next day brought small but meaningful changes. The salary cut was reversed, policies were reviewed, and the toxic influences in the background were removed. People felt comfortable voicing their concerns again. Meetings became more open, more honest. That sense of unity, which had almost been destroyed, slowly rebuilt itself. There wasn't a sudden transformation, no magical overnight fix, but there was genuine effort. And sometimes, that's the real victory. They also reflected on their own journey. What started as a humiliating blow had turned into something unexpectedly empowering. The conflict forced them to grow, to observe things more clearly, and to speak with calm conviction instead of fear. They realized that standing up for themselves didn't always mean fighting aggressively. Sometimes it meant thinking clearly, gathering facts patiently, and choosing the right moment to speak. It meant trusting their own experience, even when others doubted it. In the weeks that followed, they found their confidence returning in ways they didn't expect. They no longer walked into work with that heavy feeling in their stomach. They no longer wondered if they were replaceable or undervalued. Instead, they understood their worth fully, something no salary cut or temporary setback could take from them again. They focused on their goals, their growth, and the people who supported them through the chaos. There were still moments when they remembered how painful the situation had been. But those memories no longer carried anger. Instead, they carried lessons. They learned that workplaces are built not just on official rules, but on trust. They learned that leadership is stronger when communication is open. And they learned that even when everything feels unfair, staying grounded can change the outcome completely. As the story settled into its final moments, they took one last look at the company building. This place where so many emotions had clashed, where they had been pushed down and lifted back up, where secrets were exposed and clarity finally arrived. They didn't feel bitterness. They felt closure. They walked away with a calm sense of pride, knowing they had faced a tough challenge and turned it into something meaningful. They didn't need applause. They didn't need revenge. They only needed the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had handled everything with dignity, honesty, and strength. The people inside that building would remember the situation for a long time. They would remember the chaos, the confrontation, the moment the truth burst open, and the way one person's steady courage changed the direction of everything. And that mattered more than any dramatic ending ever could. In the end, the biggest victory wasn't that they had fixed the problem. It was that they had learned to trust themselves. The journey taught them that their voice carried weight, their work had value, and their calm strength could stand firm even in the most unexpected storms. And as they stepped forward into the next chapter of their life, they carried not the pain of the conflict, but the clarity of the lesson it taught them. Sometimes life pushes you down so you can rise stronger than before, and sometimes the story you think is ending is actually the beginning of something better.